So I finished my downloads here of both the installer as well as the extension pack, and I've just run through clicking next, 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 installing them. It's pretty straightforward how to install. You want to install VirtualBox, and then after that's done, go ahead and install the extension pack so you can have USB support. I've just put the necessary ISOs, the downloads that I've done, all here in the same folder, in a resources folder here on my desktop. And I'm going to get started in VirtualBox, and we'll take a look at how this works, creating a local virtual machine. A couple settings to pay attention to right from the start will be VirtualBox is going to make a bunch of files on your desktop every time you make a virtual, or somewhere on your computer every time you make a virtual computer. And it's good to pay attention as to where those files are being made. So if you go to File and then to Preferences or press Control-G, you'll see that there is a default machine folder location. That's probably somewhere in your user folder on your computer. I've currently changed mine to a D drive. I've got an external hard drive plugged in right now, which I like because that will save my computer disk space by having all these files work off of an external drive, as well as if I wanted to transport these virtual machines from one computer to another. Now they're on an external hard drive already, and it allows for easy transfer. So you might want to plan ahead a little bit here. Do you intend to transfer these machines to another computer, or are you working off a laptop? Are you working off a public lab computer? A little bit of planning here might save you some copy and paste later and waiting for loading bars. So that's something to pay attention to. Another useful thing to pay attention to will be in the input section. You currently have what's called a host key. Now there are many actions to use in VirtualBox where you want to send a message to the VirtualBox and not to the virtual computer itself that you're making. So long story short, there's going to be a lot of these different key commands that are host key plus another key. Now the default is to have write control. Personally, I don't really like that on this computer that I'm on right now, so I've rebound it to F10. But you'll see a lot of times I'll say press your host key plus some other combination to change something. And my host key is F10. Yours is probably write control if you haven't changed that. So a couple little settings just to pay attention to before we get started. So otherwise, I've got VirtualBox here, and we're going to get going by creating a new machine. And we'll start by making an Ubuntu machine. So we downloaded that Ubuntu ISO. I'll just go ahead and I'll call it Ubuntu 1. Sure, we'll make a couple of them. You see it automatically changes the type to Linux and the version to Ubuntu 64-bit, so yes, that's good. That's what we ended up downloading. I can say next. I'm currently on a machine that has 16 gigabytes of RAM, so you have to be able to share some memory. Linux is pretty happy running off of 1, but I'll be generous here and maybe I'll give it 2 since I've got some resources to spare. So sure, I'll give it 2 gigabytes of memory. Create a virtual hard disk, so this is those files that I was talking about that are going to get put in that user folder. We have to create that. That's the virtual hard disk. And we'll see here the default size for a Linux machine is 10 gigabytes, which is going to be plenty of space for just a practice machine. So I'll say create. VDI is the type of file. We can leave that alone. Just say next. Dynamically allocated is fine for what we're doing. Here's where if you wanted to change the actual size, maybe you wanted a machine that's going to be larger, 10 gigabytes isn't enough, then you could change that here. I'll leave it as 10 gigabytes and say create. So this is the initial set of settings that we have to do every time we make a virtual machine. I'm going to take a look at a couple other important ones here by clicking on Ubuntu and then going to Settings. Some other important settings to pay attention to. First would be the storage setting. Right now we currently have an empty optical drive. We downloaded this ISO, this optical disk, but we didn't actually put it into our computer. We didn't put it into our virtual computer. So I'm going to right click on this attachment and say remove attachment. We don't need the empty one. Yes, remove. And then just to the right of where it says controller IDE, you can see you can hit the little plus green arrow there and it'll say add optical drive. That's what we're going to do. I'm going to add an optical disk and I'll say choose disk. And then I'll go wander off to my resources folder on my desktop and find that Ubuntu guy that I just downloaded and say open. And that's me putting my Ubuntu ISO into the drive, into the optical drive. So that's good. Another setting that we're not going to change just yet, but it is important to pay attention to is the network setting. So right now, if you wander over to network, you should see it's probably set to NAT, network address translation, which means if your host computer does have internet, you will have an internet connection pass through to this virtual machine as well. That can be useful for doing things like updates. However, if you're doing some testing and you want to make sure none of your network signals get out, you might want to end up changing that from the start. So I'm okay leaving it with NAT for now. NAT and bridged are two common ones that might give you some external connection, but if you really want to cut yourself off all the way from the start, then maybe using internal or host only might be a little bit more appropriate. So, but I'm going to leave it as NAT, okay? So then we'll go ahead and we'll say start our machine. And we'll see right from the start here, there's a couple places where that host key can come into play. One will be, I currently have auto capture keyboard is turned on, as well as you can get some settings for auto capture mouse. So I clicked inside the virtual machine and it's trying to capture my mouse. So I'll say sure, okay? And this is where many virtual machines will try to grab your mouse and keep it inside the virtual machine so then you don't go wandering off the screen. This can be a little bit of a pain though if you actually do want to click back somewhere inside your host computer. So that's where knowing what your host key is will release your mouse. It'll turn that off. So for mine it'd be something like F10. I could press F10. You see in the bottom right corner of VirtualBox, you see now I'm locked in the box. Whereas if I press it again, say capture, now I'll be able to go and I'll actually be able to move my mouse outside of the box and get back to your Windows computer. So that can be kind of a tricky little thing to pay attention to. You can close these little messages as they pop up. Another thing you'll notice is I'm on a high resolution device right now, so I'm going to also mess around with my views displays. So you can change the way you view your virtual machine by clicking on view. I could go and say, hey, I want to go all the way to full screen. Sure, I'll switch to full screen, and you'll notice here pressing your host key plus F is a way you can kind of switch between, or host plus home. So let's try switch, and now I'm looking at my virtual computer taking up a full screen. So let's change that back just to see what some of these guys do. I press Control and F to kind of switch back. Another one that's useful for me, because like I said, I'm on high resolution, will be to do a scaled mode. So if I switch to scaled mode, this is something that will allow me to now kind of drag and stretch this out to be an appropriate size here on my computer. So finding the appropriate setting for you is just kind of play around with some of your view settings, and it kind of depends on, are you trying to stretch it out? Are you trying to zoom in or out? Do you want to just have it take up the whole screen? And again, remember, you can always press your Windows, or excuse me, your host key, and then the appropriate letter to kind of switch back between. Okay, so I am going to keep it at a scaled mode. Scaled mode will be useful for me, so then we can kind of see what we're doing here on the screen. Okay, so for this computer, I am actually going to install Ubuntu. We'll have something that we can use this time, we can use next time, we can use in the future. If you just wanted Ubuntu to be up and running right away, you could click try, of course, but I'm going to go through the installation process, and we'll have something that has a bit of persistence, something I can come back to later. If you wanted to download updates while installing, you could. I'm going to skip this for now just so then it goes a little quicker, and you can do your updates once the virtual machine is up and running. Erase disk and install Ubuntu. Yes, that's where we're going to fill up that 10 gigabytes. And saying yes, this is the place where we're going to put it. I'm going to say continue. We're going to fill the entire 10 gigabytes. I'm currently in Eastern time zone, so yes, I'll keep it as that. English, yes. Oop, I'm a little bit off my screen here because my resolution's a little funky. Say continue. Name, we'll come up with a simple name like NSARRC. And we'll have a simple password like password, just so then it's something about it so I don't forget it. Computer's name, NSA, I like it. Continue. And now we get to watch some loading bars as it goes through and sets up, installs Linux. So I'll see you back in a few minutes after we're done with the installation. Okay, so it looks like we're back. Installation is finally complete. And I'm going to go ahead and restart the computer now. As part of this process, Ubuntu will usually remove the ISO from your optical drive for you automatically, but there is something kind of to pay attention to if it doesn't. Go ahead and press enter. So now this time when I turn on the virtual machine, let's see if I can grab the setting where it says, if I come over here to settings and go to storage, you see it has automatically removed the ISO, so I'm no longer running this off of a live boot. This has been installed on the actual VDI, the hard disk that I made, and I've got my NSA RRC user account with my simple password of password. and I'm able to log in and use the device. We can also notice over in that folder on my hard drive, on my external hard drive, how I have created now an Ubuntu 1 folder that's currently taking up a few gigs of information or a few gigs of space. Here's the VDI that we were talking about before, and this is the thing that you would want to transport from one computer to another to be able to use this virtual machine across different host machines. Okay, but otherwise, I'm up and running. I've got a computer. I believe I'm still attached here as NAT, so if on the left I pop open Mozilla, we'll just give it a try here quick. See if I can actually reach the internet on this guy. Let's open up a new tab and try hitting mvcc.edu. And sure enough, I'm able to hit the page, hit the home page. So NAT is up and working, and my networking is good. So, but this is the basics of creating a virtual machine. Anything now that I do in this virtual machine will be saved from turn on to turn off in that RRC folder that we saw previously. So that's what the benefit here of installing a virtual machine now. I could test lots of stuff. I could break lots of things. I could throw the machine away and make a new one. Very, very useful for messing around and testing. When it comes time to turning the guy off, there are kind of two ways to do it. I could go to my normal power button and say shut down the computer like normal and it'll turn off. I could also just kind of click the X and you'll kind of have two options here. I could save the state of the machine, which is kind of like pausing time in the machine. It'll actually pause the time and everything, and then when I resume, it's like no time has passed and I can continue working. Or this was power off the machine is kind of like hard pulling the plug on the computer. Realize some computers like Windows really don't like that, but Linux isn't going to care too much if I just say power off the machine and kill it. Okay. Now that I've killed the machine, I'd like to see what happens if I were to restart the computer without the different networking settings. So if let's say I went and I did all my updates and I'm now going to test some things and I want to make sure it doesn't actually mess with any network signals anywhere. Something that you could do is change from NAT or bridge adapter to, let's say, an internal network. And VirtualBox will create an internal network with the name INT, NET, IntNet, internal network. You can take a look here at some of the advanced settings of what it's actually going to share and if you want to change the MAC addresses, etc. So, but I'm going to try what happens when I now just create the machine with IntNet. That's all it took, was changing that network setting. And now this time when I start up the machine, we'll hopefully see how I no longer have network connection. My computer is starting here from scratch, and it's a very useful way to grab things off the internet, do the updates you need to do, grab whatever software and download what you need into your environment. But then when it comes time to doing any of your testing, you've kind of gone dark and you're put yourself on your own network password, okay, to be able to get me in. And here now I'm into my Linux computer, and we'll test it, like I said, by seeing if I can still go out to the internet, and I shouldn't be able to now with my internal network. So now when I wander over to mvcc.edu, I'm going to get a problem loading page. Now, I've been disconnected now, so pay attention to your network settings, pay attention to where your files are being stored, and learn about the host key. The host key is pretty useful for using VirtualBox effectively and not banging your head against the wall trying to figure out why can't I press this button, or how come I can't stretch the screen. Things like that are common issues when you're starting. So, okay, cool. So now that we've got this guy, I'm just going to kill it, power him off. And now I'm going to create another virtual machine, but this one I'm going to make slightly differently. You'll notice your Metasploitable download was actually a zipped folder. So if you unzip this, I'm going to extract it all. Sure, I'll just extract it right here. Don't need to show it. Inside here is the actual ISO, or excuse me, is the a VDI this time. So previously you downloaded a disk image so that we could install a computer. With Metasploitable, what you have is you have a vulnerable image that's already been made. The computer has already been created, and so when you actually go to start this in VirtualBox, your settings are going to be different. So in here is where your Metasploitable. You see here I've got the virtual machine disk image is what you have, not an ISO. So let's see how this is different if I were to make a computer using with Metasploitable. So I'm still going to start the same way. This one I'll call just Meta. So I've got a Linux computer that doesn't automatically recognize. I'll just say an other Linux 64-bit, sure, for Metasploitable. We might make more of the ones, so I'll call this one Meta 1. Say next. Metasploitable is a vulnerable computer that's been created, and it does not have a GUI. It's run completely off of a command line interface. You have just a terminal is all that you access, so it's pretty happy with just a little bit of memory. It doesn't take much. I'll leave it at half a gig is fine. And this is the setting that's different. So if you have an existing virtual machine, whether you got it from a USB drive or whether you downloaded, in this case, an image from the internet, the difference is do not create a new virtual hard disk. You already have one. We're going to use an existing virtual hard disk. And then I'm going to click on the little folder icon here, and I'm going to go to my desktop where I've downloaded in resources. I've downloaded Metasploitable to Linux. Okay, and inside here is where I have that previous virtual disk drive. Virtual disk has already been created. So then I'll say open. So I'm using an existing one. I'm not creating one from scratch. And then click the create button. Okay. Now, like I mentioned before, Metasploitable has a whole bunch of vulnerabilities built in. It's great for testing and practice. However, realize you've got a computer that has a whole bunch of vulnerabilities, and maybe you shouldn't be exposing this to the internet. So I would definitely stress anytime you're running a Metasploitable, make sure you change your network settings immediately before you even turn it on. So this is another one where I'm going to say let's make it an internal only. I'll put it on that same internal net, kind of like before, where he won't be able to see the internet at all. Okay, and then you can go ahead and click start. There is no ISO to put in the drive like before. Like I said, the machine has already been created, and you can kind of go through the same process of starting your computer after it's already been installed. That's what you're going to have here with this. Your Metasploitable machine is going to be very similar to that. So after you've started your Metasploitable machine, this is what you're going to see. You'll see it's a quick login with MSFadmin. MSFadmin, there is no GUI. It's all run here off of the terminal. So you say MSFadmin to get started. And now I'm logged into a Linux machine that I can use, like I said, for testing. But very important, do not expose this guy to the internet. It is inherently vulnerable, and you don't want to expose that. So, okay, so lastly, why don't we take a look at installing a Kali Linux machine as well while we're at it. So I'll do one more of clicking on the new button. Call this one Kali Linux 1, sure. Kali Linux does have an interface and certainly would be happier with a little bit more memory, so I'll increase this one as well to 2 gigabytes. We don't have an existing hard drive, so I'll make one now. VDI is fine. Dynamically allocated, sure. Kali, again, might be a little bit happier if you give it a little bit more space. It takes a little bit more than Ubuntu, so I'm just going to increase mine to maybe 15 gigabytes for testing. That should be plenty. Say create. Now, a little trick if you're doing an install, and again, it depends kind of on your resources of the computer you're running off of, but when you go to System, you can change the processors, how many CPUs you actually reserve for this virtual machine, which can help increase your installation time. So something like this, I don't have any other virtual computers running. I'm going to increase it. I'm on 8 CPUs right now, so I'll have my virtual machine actually use 4 of them. So that might help your installation time a little bit. And then just like before, storage, we have an empty optical drive. I'm going to remove this attachment and click on the little add optical drive to be able to put the Kali ISO in, just like we did with the Ubuntu machine. So here's my Kali Linux download that I just did as well. Okay. I'll still leave it with NAT so we can have network connection. I'll have an up-to-date Linux machine when I get this started. So I'm going to click my start button and we'll turn it on now. Okay, just like before, I'm kind of on a high resolution, so let me change my view to a scaled mode. It's just going to work a little bit better for mine. Stretch this guy out. So an important setting when taking a look at Kali Linux will be the very first thing wants to just do a live boot, just like before with Linux. But we'd like to actually do an install, so I'm going to use my arrow keys and arrow my way down to doing a graphical install. I'm going to install, but I'm going to use a GUI to install. I don't want to use it just using my keyboard. So we will get started here with the install. And now I've got a mouse, and it's just like before with Ubuntu, only you're going to have probably a couple more options as you go through the installation process. Continue, continue, continue. So we'll give the computer a name. Sure, I'll just leave it as Kali. That works for me. No, I don't need a domain right now. Have a root password. So again, this is going to be something very, very simple. I'm just going to have password again, just to make sure things are fine. Set up my clock. Yes, I'm in Eastern time zone. Okay, I want to use the entire disk, all 15 gigabytes that I set aside. Yes, that's what I'll do. All in one partition, sure. And then say finish and write changes to disk, continue. This is going to write the changes. Are you sure you want to change to? Yes, I am sure. We're going to write all this information. And now we watch loading bars for a little bit. So I'll skip ahead. Okay, so I've gone through the majority of the installation of the system. So no, I'm not going to use a network mirror. Install grub bootloader to be the master boot record. Yes, this is the piece that's going to take manage our boot process, and I will have our SDA continue. So installation's complete, and it wants to now reboot the system. Sure, we'll hit continue. Okay, so my computer's now rebooted, Grub has now started, and it's going to start the launch process. We're going to start the boot process here for Kali. And things seem to be good. So I'll use my username. Default username was root. I set my default root password to be password. And now I've got my functional Linux computer. Just like before, I still had my network settings set to be NAT. If I go to my settings and say network is still, I'm at NAT settings. So on the top left of your little toolbar, this is where you have Firefox. So again, let's give a test to see, do I actually have network internet connection right now? Start up. Looks like it. I'll open up a new tab and see if I can hit mvcc.edu, and I can. So this is how we can create some virtual machines using either Kali Linux, Ubuntu, Metasploitable. Just like before, I'll just kind of pull the plug on this guy, say turn off. Okay, and I now have got 3 different machines that we can use for offensive purposes, for defensive purposes, for vulnerable testing and patching. It gives us a lot to play around with if we can understand how to use this powerful tool, VirtualBox.